Hope you're enjoying your Sunday. Guys, with all that's going on right now um, in various parts of the world, I felt the need to discuss anger, aggression, and rage. Many of us are still in lockdown with very little control over our futures, and I'll probably point out specifically places like Melbourne and Sydney in Australia, um, who we can see, when we can travel, work, and socialise, etc. again. This is totally unnatural, of course. The detrimental effects are now showing in various ways as we finally crack. Today's society and the world we live in is so full of anger, aggression, rage, oppression, division, inequality. For many of us living in a surreal dystopian world where it seems the rules are made up as they go by a ruling elite who are only minimally affected by their decisions. And by that I mean pricks like Dictator Dan. The rest of us, however, are affected, from job losses to loneliness, bankruptcy to suicide, grief and suffering, broken families, and families separated by border closures, domestic violence, alcohol and substance abuse. The list goes on. So, of course, we are angry. However, there is a healthy anger, which is a natural survival strategy. For example, being angry enough about the current situation to protest and stand up to this tyranny. And then there is destructive anger, which is basically uncontrolled rage. We've seen that by some of the so-called cops, haven't we? Back to basics then. Anger is an ancient survival mechanism, part of the fight or flight response of our autonomic nervous system, which was critical for our survival a long, long time ago. When our amygdala senses danger, our autonomic nervous system takes over and prepares us to either run away if we are frightened or stay and fight if we are angry. It can even go further and put us into a freeze state. And that happens a lot of us as well, where we feel so helpless and powerless that we just do nothing. Once we have taken action, we gradually calm down. So overall, a pretty good survival tool, or it was in simpler times. These days, life is far more complex. We certainly can't go around just bashing people that upset us by taking our parking spot, for example. Which means that in this so-called civilized world we live in, rather than our autonomic nervous system just being able to do its job and then us returning to normal, instead we tend to live with the suppressed emotions eating us up. Worse than that, as I have explained in other posts, the fight or flight response also caused many of our automatic bodily functions to be shut down. So we are also damaging our health, both physically and mentally. You know, if that's prolonged, it's only meant to be a very short stopgap measure to protect us. Knowing all this, then, it makes sense that we try to prevent anger from happening, or at least be in control by observing our thoughts, our feelings, what or who triggers us and makes us more prone to angry, even aggressive outbursts. Typical times to look out for in yourself and in others would be such things as stressed, overworked, overtired, hormonal changes, illness or chronic pain, as all these conditions will lower our threshold to emotional arousal. But what about the uncontrolled rage, the violence rampant in today's society? What's going on there? As I mentioned earlier, the amygdala is the brain's alarm system. Basically, it pattern matches the signals it gets from our five senses with past experiences stored away in our memory. Thing is, it is part of our much more primitive emotional brain and not part of our thinking or rational brain. Therefore, as such, it does not look at the information objectively. Instead, it makes a split-second decision based on how closely the perceived danger matches our memory of past experience. And this is the important bit relative to rage. We act before the thinking brain gets a chance to intervene. This is because in order to survive, the amygdala and the thinking brain simply can't be in charge at the same time. So if the amygdala is in that state of trance, then unfortunately the rational brain doesn't get a look in. In effect, anger makes us stupid. Well, actually, any high emotional arousal that shuts down the thinking brain makes us stupid. The amygdala in this moment only cares about whether to fight or run, which is very black or white thinking. No time for others' point of view or looking at the big picture there. That is why the worst thing you can do when confronted by a person in this state is to argue with them. In the moment, they can't consider even for a moment that any point of view other than their own could possibly be right. Remember, their rational brain is shut down, and their emotional brain believes they are in danger. Okay, you say, so this doesn't explain why some people become so angry that they resort to violence. What causes such excessive anger? Many of you would have heard me talk about emotional needs before. And just like anxiety, depression, and addiction, people who become excessively angry are also likely not getting those innate needs met in a healthy manner. For example, the need to feel secure. If we don't, we are likely to resort to violence. The need to feel in control of our lives. As we can see at the moment, the current restrictions and infringements on our freedoms are causing people to react angrily. Other needs, our need for intimacy and connection. If you're locked down and can't meet people, they're not being met. Our need to feel a part of the community, need to feel a sense of purpose, etc. Right now, we're in the eye of the storm worldwide. Well, in certain parts of the world, anyway. And the problem is the rest of them are all the right jacks. There's way too many of them. But sorry for my opinion. We're in the eye of the storm worldwide, as so many of us are unable to get those essential needs met, and the rest don't seem to care. So knowing this, what can we do as individuals? We may not be able to change the world, but we can reframe how we see it and instead focus on what we can do. To begin with, along with having these essential needs, we also have innate resources that we can turn to. These include the ability to think things through. We have a powerful imagination, which mostly we use incorrectly, but we have a powerful imagination to visualize a better future and to plan for it. The ability to step back into our observer self and be more objective. Of course, to do this, we need to lower our emotional arousal so that the rational brain gets a look in again. Learning how to calm down with breathing techniques such as 7-11 is critical. Learning how to relax by taking a walk in nature or whatever works for you. Read a book, yoga, meditate. Becoming mindful and learning to observe your thoughts and feelings. This is really important so that you actually nip it in the bud before you lose control. Then we can begin to use these resources and other tools, for example, to help deal with negative self-talk. We could use tools such as the ABC, awareness, block, and challenge. That is, becoming aware, blocking, and then challenging the thoughts as they arise. All very well, you say, but what if we do find ourselves in the heat of the moment and feel our temper rising? At this stage, the safest thing to do is to call it time out. That is, instead of you both screaming your heads off at each other, or worse, you instead state that you need to step back to calm down. This is even more critical for males. I won't go into it here, but we're just wired differently. Make sure to point out that you are not walking away or minimizing the problem. State where you are going and how long you will be, and that once you calm down, you do intend to come back to the discussion and to resolve it calmly and positively. Easier said than done, I know, but we need to learn to step in before the fight or flight takes over. Unresolved conflict is a major contributor to relationship breakdown, by the way. So if you want to save your relationship, whether that's with a partner, an employer, employee, etc., it is worth understanding what is happening when you feel that anger, and learn to take control before it's too late. In other words, nip it in the bud. As you feel the anger rising, realize what's happening, and that's where the mindfulness and observing comes in. Okay, guys, anger, rage, aggression, it's a huge topic, and unfortunately with what's happening in the world, it's not going to go away. It's not something we can cover in one session, but I do hope this overview has given you all some food for thought. Till next time, guys. Cheers.